Hi, I'm Kieren.
And I'm Riku.
Welcome to Artificially Ever After, where today we're going to be talking about
how Teslas can see.
Hi, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. And today we're going to be switching things up slightly. So if you've listened to our previous episodes, we've been talking a lot about ChatGPT just because it was kind of very appropriate and everyone was talking about it. We're now going to cover the world of computer vision and how AI and specifically self-driving cars are able to see and interpret the world.
Yeah, we picked self-driving cars because it's probably one of the most exciting applications of computer vision. But before we go on, what is computer vision?
Yeah, it's super high level. It's basically just allowing computers to interpret some visual information and kind of see pictures and videos.
Yeah, nice.
And like you see the latest version of ChatGPT, I said I wasn't going to talk about GPT, but the latest version they've just released over the past couple of weeks can now interpret images and visual data. So there's like lots of cool stuff going on in the world of computer vision at the moment. So we thought we'd kind of cover the foundations and introduce you a bit to CV.
So we're going to quickly just kind of, for fun, skim over kind of some movies and like when they predicted self-driving cars to
pop
come
culture.
out. Yeah. And then, overview some challenges, history, and actually kind of look into the relationship between human vision and AI vision. And then we're going to focus on Tesla, have a quick break, and then we'll talk about some ethics.
Yeah, I thought it'd be cool to start with just to see, because the idea and kind of concept of self-driving cars has been around for decades, and it's kind of cropped up in movies and pop culture. So we just wanted to kind of go back and have a look when in movies specifically people were kind of depicting that we'd have fully self-driving cars. So just got a couple of examples there if you want to read those off.
Yeah, just as a disclaimer, we kind of just thought of these movies ourselves, like which movies remind us of self-driving cars. So, and there's a quite an interesting trend. So we first thought of Total Recall, which came out in 1990.
Great film.
Yeah, predicted in 2084. That's when it was set, at least, with self-driving cars.
Yeah, Minority Report, that was another film that depicted self-driving cars. That was made in 2002 and set in 2054, so they were kind of predicting things happening a little bit sooner.
And then iRobot came out in 2004, and that was set in 2034.
Yeah, I remember that film with Will Smith, and he's driving around his little self-driving Audi, which I always used to think was pretty cool as a kid.
Was that a robot driving the car?
No, that was a self-driving car. He'd just get in, kind of go on his phone or whatever, and it'd just drive him to where he wanted to go. Yeah, so you have these films that were kind of depicting self-driving cars into the kind of 2030s, 2050s, but I definitely think in the early 21st century, people actually started talking and companies started talking about starting to develop self-driving cars, and there was this maybe understanding or these kind of predictions of them being on the roads in the 2020s, 2030s. In 2015, Elon Musk was a good example and was kind of saying about how Teslas would achieve fully autonomous driving by like 2018, and he kind of very adamantly said that was a time that he thought they'd be on the road by, and obviously we've seen that kind of timescale has been pushed back a lot. So it's very interesting to see people's predictions as to when we'd have this technology by. Yeah,
it feels like it's always next year, and the next year comes and...
Yeah, right, it just keeps getting pushed back. But I think before we move on, one important thing to clarify and why there's often a kind of discrepancy or people think we have self-driving, but it's not that clear, is because the term itself is pretty unclear in how it's used and how people refer to self-driving.
Yeah, exactly. And there's basically 6 levels of self-driving car, and level 0 is no automation. So we've had level 0 self-driving for since the beginning of the first car, I guess. But
so that is no human, no driving. So that's fully manual driving.
All manual, yeah, nothing special there.
Cool.
But maybe more interestingly, like level 1 called driver assistance, stuff like cruise control, some steering alerts.
And again, they've been around for a while now as well, haven't they?
Yeah, so like the kind of thing that will just maybe if you veer off on a motorway and you go over a line, it will beep and say, "Oh,
nudge you back in." Yeah.
But fundamentally, it's all still human control, other than these small little things like
just assistance, yeah.
But then level 2 starts to get a bit exciting, and this is actually where things are at right now, where the vehicle can like control some steering, some acceleration, but fundamentally the human has to be alert and ready to take over all times, and that final sentence is very critical. But then when we move to level 3,
So just to clarify on level 2, so you kind of things, your household names like Tesla, so they're mostly sitting around level 2, right?
yes, exactly, and there's a big reason why these household names are stuck on level 2, and that's kind of rooted in what's to come next in level 3, which is called conditional driving automation. So it's very similar to level 2, but it's more like it protects the driver more. So when it's in self-driving mode, at least in the UK, the current legislation says that if you have a level 3 car and it's claiming to be, assisting your driving or taking over, if it were to crash, it wouldn't be the driver's fault anymore. Whereas with the level 2, you are supposed to be completely alert all the time.
So level 3, there's a lot more responsibility then on the manufacturers and the cars that they make. So I suppose in their mind, it's maybe not in their best interest to kind of get to level 3 because they have to start taking on some of the kind of responsibility.
Exactly. So that's why so although the Tesla could probably
Technology-wise.
technologically have some level 3 features. There's an Audi A8 model that supposedly at level 3 features, but these are both still at level 2 because of this kind of because of these legal reasons. So
yeah, there seems, I mean, we'll touch on this later, but there are a lot of manufacturers around the world now that are kind of saying that they've got these level 3 ready cars that are already on the road, but they're just not allowed to kind of go into the fully autonomous mode where you don't need a human at all.
yeah, and so level 4 is just a bit more of an extension of level 3, where the car is now expected to handle almost every situation, but there is kind of quotes in most circumstances. So sometimes a human may be needed, but it's generally expected that you won't need a human anymore. And level 5 is the full automation, no more human needed. You probably won't even have a steering wheel kind of thing.
Yeah, that's like the kind of Will Smith in iRobot stuff where there's not even a steering wheel, I don't think, if my memory's correct.
Cool. So hopefully that kind of defines the different levels of self-driving and kind of the road to automation.
Nice.
Pardon the pun, yeah.
But yeah, I suppose now let's kind of get into some of the ways in which these manufacturers are kind of allowing cars to drive themselves and why it's maybe been more of a challenge than we initially expected, or, it was kind of portrayed in pop culture at least.
I guess we've kind of established there's the hardware side and the societal side of things, and maybe we could say that it's actually the societal side that's kind of holding us back.
You think we're getting close to that point? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we'll quickly cover, there's like kind of different sensors for these cars and how they see the world. And they're pretty good generally right now, but fundamentally it's this kind of issue of like, how do we handle these societal problems? Who's to blame when things go wrong? And that seems to be the bottleneck right now.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think on the technological side, like in terms of computer vision, so allowing computers to interpret the visual world, that's been something that researchers and computer scientists have been thinking about since the kind of 50s, right? So just to kind of go back and talk a bit about the early days of getting computers to see and how we've kind of progressed from there, should maybe give some intuition as to where we're at currently. So yeah, it was in the 50s that this concept of allowing computers to see the visual world started to emerge. So not long after that, we had the first ever digital image scanner that was invented in 1959, where we were able to transform an image into a grid of numbers that a computer could read.
And this kind of kickstarted a lot more, rapid growth. So in the 1960s, we kind of had this guy called Marvin Minsky. He's kind of known as a father of AI. And
yeah, one of the three fathers of AI, isn't he?
Yeah, so one of his grad students managed to actually connect one of these digital cameras to a computer and have it describe what it sees.
Yeah, and I think what was funny with this summer project is it was exactly that. Like, I think a lot of the people in the field, after I think they thought the hard part was getting the digital information into a computer and that the easy part would be interpreting it. So they did kind of set out with this summer vision project to sort of solve this problem in a fairly short period of time. But I guess little did they know it would be decades away from that we'd kind of start cracking the problem.
Yeah, we thought it was easy. And in the 1970s, kind of just further expansion development of these computer vision methods. So more tasks like edge detection and feature extraction, so kind of understanding more fundamental things about shapes of objects were kind of getting learned.
Yeah, so this very kind of coarse grain understanding of certain aspects of images, but by no means kind of understanding what was in the image, just like you said, where the sort of edges and lines are.
Yeah, almost trying to fix the things we thought would be easy, actually really difficult. Like detecting edges is not a simple problem.
Yeah.
And then in the 80s, we kind of moved on to putting these vision models into the real world. So in industry, automation of quality control and stuff like that.
Yeah. And then the 90s was an interesting one when started to try and teach computers using machine learning to detect and recognize faces.
So then following this, we kind of had a small kind of, they say like an AI winter, right?
Yeah,
Then AI kind of had a bit of a plateau in kind of development because things were starting to get very computationally expensive. But then, we had another boom.
Yeah, so I think if you had listened to our first episode when we kind of clarify the differences of AI terminology, machine learning, deep learning, we started this kind of deep learning revolution where we had lots and lots of data to give computers and let them learn in their own way. So in the 2010s, this was when we started doing that with image data and using deep learning for computer vision. And since then, it's kind of skyrocketed and there's been crazy advancements. But that is basically how computer vision is mostly done now, using deep learning, right?
Yep. And if you ever see the word or the letters CNN, convolutional neural network, that is the current state of the art. Onto the 2020s, we're kind of only just now seeing the ethical and social implications of AI, and specifically for stuff like vision, where it's being used for face recognition. And there are many stories on this one, but I guess in the 2020s we just started to actually realize just how powerful computer vision can be.
And what's interesting, just like really quickly linking that to our understanding of human vision has evolved. They've kind of evolved together. I think initially in the early days of teaching computers to see, we were doing that in accordance with our current understanding of how the human eye detects visual stimulus and converts that to kind of electrical signals. And we were kind of dissecting the different parts of the human vision system and trying to match that up entirely with computers. But I think the really interesting change, around the time with sort of deep learning is our understanding of human vision, that it's not simply the ability for the eye to turn the kind of visual input into electrical signals. There's a huge second part which is arguably more important for how we're able to see and understand the world, which is our kind of inference. So how our brain then learns and understands those electrical signals. So that is this kind of deep learning part. So in terms of how humans see, so much of it is around kind of our experience and the things that we see growing up, and we kind of build this sort of knowledge base of things that we've seen and our understanding of the world, and that allows us to kind of very quickly identify new things and understand what they are. So it's not simply because we can kind of see the lines and the colors, it's how our brain then interprets all of that. And this is kind of the analogy that we're starting to see with deep learning. We've kind of got the mechanisms to take that visual input and turn them into digital data that the computer can read, but we're now starting to get into allowing computers to understand that data on their own.
And there's a great thing about using kind of computers to understand the visual world, in the sense that humans and our eyes, they only receive visual stimuli. It's just light rays hitting the retina. Whereas when we try and use computers to understand the visual world, we can use different types of sensors. So we can use cameras that receive the visual light, but also stuff like radar and LiDAR, which receive different frequencies of light.
Yeah, so this is the benefit of kind of technology and innovation, that we aren't just kind of constrained to biology, that we can, manipulate things in different ways.
Exactly, yeah. That's kind of a strength of AI, is it can almost have intelligence beyond the sensors that we have, right? And an example of a company that's taken advantage of this is Waymo, who have got like a level 4 self-driving car, so it's kind of expected to do well, and it's only been allowed to run in certain parts of Arizona. But they use cameras, radar, and LiDAR, combination of different types of visual information. And to give you kind of an idea of the strengths and weaknesses of these different sensors, is the good thing about cameras is that they're cheap, whereas radar and LiDAR are more expensive. However, a big difficulty of the cameras is the depth perception. Cameras visualize things in 2D, and it's a really big challenge to turn this 2D information into 3D, whereas stuff like radar and LiDAR fundamentally work off of reflecting light off of objects to estimate their distance. Another problem with kind of visual things is with cameras is that they are quite weather dependent. So you can imagine that the data that the cameras capture, that if they're trained in places like California, can be very different to the roads in Alaska, for example.
Yeah, and also even the fact that kind of radar and lidar, they can see through a lot of that weather as well, right? So in the case of fog is like massively disrupting what the camera's seeing, but like the radars can just penetrate straight through that and still detect what they're normally detecting. So they're weather independent.
Exactly that. So you can see why kind of Waymo decided to do this kind of combination approach to and successfully create these level 4 self-driving cars.
Nice. So yeah, I think it does make a lot of sense that if you've got that technology to hand and if you can see through fog, why wouldn't you, right? But the reason why we name this episode How Do Teslas Drive Themselves, and we wanted to focus more on Tesla's approach, is because fairly recently Elon Musk, somewhat controversially, kind of changed the whole philosophy of how they were developing Tesla's self-driving autonomous driving technology, and have gone they've scrapped all of those other types of sensors, and they're solely relying on visual cameras now, aren't they? So very, very different to how all the other companies are approaching self-driving. And what's interesting and slightly concerning as well is that a lot of these other companies and experts in the kind of field of computer vision are kind of dismissing that approach and saying that it's not going to work and that it's a kind of dead end, pardon the pun. But Elon is like very set that this is the way to go. And his argument from what you see kind of in the news is that, roads and cars and road networks are designed for humans that are driving and only receive this visual stimulus. So therefore, cars, if their perception of the visual world is as good as humans, should be able to navigate those road systems as well. But his critics say that the real reason that they're kind of approaching it this way is because of cost, and that lidar and radar sensors are very expensive, like you mentioned, Riku, and that to reach the kind of target numbers that they want to achieve in terms of production, the only way to do that without going bankrupt is to slash those sensors and just use cameras.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to call it a mistake, but it sounds like it's possibly the kind of idea that emulating human intelligence is a good proxy just for general intelligence.
So to just now kind of quickly demystify how Tesla are using this approach and using AI to navigate with their cars, let's just quickly cover what they're doing slightly technically. So as we were saying, they rely purely on visual data from cameras. So that new Teslas now that are being launched have 8 cameras around their cars, and they have a deep neural network. So these are the kind of tools that we spoke about in our first episode. And the first task that they have to do is take the 2D video data that's coming into those cameras and try to understand and infer the 3D world, so how far away things are from the car, the trajectory that they're moving on, so their kind of speed. So this is the first task, is to try to detect each of the objects, what that object is, and whether it's stationary or if it's moving, which directions it's moving in and how quickly. And in doing so, with these 8 cameras, what they do is they generate this bird's eye view, this top-down view of the car in a kind of 3D model that is then able to have the car in the center, and then a kind of radius around the car where we have all of these 3D modeled objects and their position, direction, velocity, and that is the first step in understanding the visual world. So this is kind of learnt by the computer to make this kind of conversion. And then the second step is to then learn how to navigate through that modeled world. Yeah,
exactly. And you can imagine that as many different actions to do in different situations, but luckily because the cameras are learning, they are recording while there's a human controlling the vehicle. For every environment, every reconstructed top-down view, there's going to be some action of a human, and using those actions, it can teach the AI what to do in each situation. And the main idea is that environments that look similar will have similar optimal actions.
Yeah, I also don't know if I'm assuming Tesla kind of inform their customers when they're buying the cars, but yeah, they're using their customers as sort of training data. So they're storing all of the footage from these cameras whilst humans are driving their cars to train and help the computer to to learn what to do. So it's almost as if they've got a little, I know we made that analogy of the librarian in the ChatGPT episode. It's like they've got a little robot sat in the passenger seat of every single Tesla car where a human's driving, and it's kind of watching what the human does.
Yeah, I mean, but I think they're doing a great job because so if you just quickly go on the Tesla website and look at the number of miles before an accident happens, the US average is about 0.5 million miles. But Tesla drivers without autopilot is about 1.5. So Tesla drivers are already generally safer than your US average. But then Tesla drivers using autopilot technology can go about 4.8 million miles before an accident.
And I think that, we've not really covered this in the intro, but that is the kind of big benefit and motivation for self-driving, isn't it? And why so many companies and governments are pushing for it is that, imagine the car has something operating it that is always 100% focused on the task at hand and is not distracted by anything, has full 360 view of things around the car. In the case of LiDAR and radar, can see through fog and different weather conditions. So it's, in this kind of ideal scenario where everything's working perfectly with all these sensors, it's bound to be driving better than a human, and it can kind of free the human up from that task of always remaining focused and conscious of everything going on.
So hopefully that gives a breakdown of kind of where we're at with self-driving and demystifying kind of how Tesla are kind of trying to change the game.
Yeah, so now let's take a little quick break, do our fun fact segment. We got a lot of positive feedback on that from last time, so we're going to stick with that for now. And then we'll come back in the second half where we'll talk about ethics and current legislation with self-driving.
So AI fun fact time. I would like to say probably didn't do enough fact checking, but this one's quite funny.
We'll roll with it anyway.
So Nikola Tesla, very famous, he kind of pioneered basically electricity, the use of alternating current. So all of the electricity from plug sockets use AC. So,
and also the influence for the name of Elon Musk's car company, Tesla.
Well, there we go. He supposedly abstained for his entire life because as an inventor, he believed that it would keep his mind clear.
Right. So, yeah, my AI fun fact is once again slightly more involved. I'm going to have to start getting some shorter, quicker ones. But basically, in 2017, Facebook AI Research Lab released a report describing how they were trying to challenge their chatbots that they were building at the time to negotiate with each other and kind of trade items with each other. And in this report, it basically stated that the researchers had to put some pretty strict limits on these chatbots because otherwise the best way for them to kind of trade with each other and make the most successful deals was when they would actually make changes to the English language and start communicating in their kind of own modified version of English that was a lot more efficient and made it easier for them to negotiate.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
That's so cool.
Cool. And back to the episode. So welcome back, and we're now going to get into some of the ethics and some of the interesting moral questions of self-driving, right?
Yes, and just want to talk probably about the most famous problem, maybe in ethics, and certainly for relevant to self-driving cars, is the trolley problem. So just to kind of give a quick explanation of what the trolley problem is, and then kind of in its original setting, and then we'll bring it to self-driving. So
please.
The trolley problem is a moral dilemma, and it's about a situation where you have a runaway trolley, which is a train, with 5 people tied to one track, and there's a junction in between these 5 people and the train. And you, as an observer, are standing kind of right by the junction. You can pull a lever, which could divert the trolley onto another track where there's only one person. So the central question is it morally acceptable to actively choose to sacrifice one person to save the others? So
sounds like a no-brainer, no?
It does feel like a no-brainer initially, but you have to consider, are you willing to take responsibility to pull the lever?
And intervene.
Is it your responsibility? All these philosophical questions, Now, that's quite relevant for autonomous driving because you can imagine that there's going to be small whispers of the trolley problem all around, or in fact the very trolley problem. You can have maybe people crossing the road at the wrong time, and and you're traveling too fast to brake, and the car has to pick a side to go down, and sadly collide with a certain type of person on each side of the road.
Of course. And I think another one too is like, if the kind of main objective of a car, if they're designed that way, is to sort of protect the driver, the person who's within that vehicle and is being transported by that vehicle. If that decision is between maintaining on the current course and going full speed into like a wall and obviously obliterating the driver, or moving away from that wall but it kills a load of pedestrians but saves the driver, is another kind of type of...
That is exactly it. And if you want to find out kind of where you stand on this, there's a really good website called themoralmachine.net, and just kind of give a quick example of exactly this, where you have a picture of a crossing, and there's on the car's current path there's a red light, so there shouldn't be people crossing, but there may be one person and a dog on that line. But then on the other side, on the other side of the road, there may be green lights, so you're allowed to cross, but then there's just one person there. Is it better to respect the law and just go down? These people shouldn't be crossing the road, but they are. Boom, you get them. Or is it worth going against not respecting law and sadly hitting just the one person who was following their rules? So
yeah, and I think just to sort of clarify why that is so relevant in the context of self-driving, like in the situation where a human's driving the car, they will kind of make that instinctive snap decision that might vary from person to person depending your kind of past experiences and the part of the world you're in. But when we're designing these cars and self-driving, there has to be some preconceived decision there. So someone has to have thought about some of these scenarios and kind of what goes on, which is why it's an ethical consideration, is because people are starting to think about, before these events have happened, what would the outcome have to be.
Exactly. That's a really interesting nuance, because there's kind of right now with the debate, people seem more open to humans making authentic errors, but there seems to be something different about an AI that's been pre-coded that makes an error. Or when I say an error, like makes a decision in this context.
Yeah. That's sort of saying, you're only human. Like, I think we just kind of understand and expect us to be imperfect, and that these mistakes are bound to happen with the sort of chaos of roads. But, as we were saying, with cars, with LiDAR sensors, radar sensors are able to see all of these things at all times. If they're able to detect these things, they should, in theory, I guess, be able to avoid them as well, or at least that's the expectation, maybe.
I mean, here's the trolley problem, right? Do you pick a world where humans make more accidents and more people die, or do you pick a world where you let computers take over driving and there are fewer deaths? So moving
again,
on.
Sounds like a no-brainer, no?
Yeah. Just wanted to quickly skim over a huge research paper, and they basically asked 70,000 participants about this trolley problem, and I just thought I'd just talk about it because just to kind of reflect on how the world sees the trolley problem, because this study went from Oceania, Americas, Europe, and Asia, and generally kind of Western cultures are pretty keen, quite happy to pull the lever. So you get like around 80% of respondents would indeed pull the lever
and intervene,
and you'll find in Asian countries, particularly Hong Kong, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, China, you'll get about 60% intervention rate, which is much, much lower.
Wow, it's interesting there's such a difference, depending where you are in the world, and I guess therefore maybe how these self-driving cars are being developed differently as well. So now just to sort of bring things back to where we started with sort of legislation, because obviously we've had all these technological advancements, and what we're starting to see now is that some of the resistance to having more self-driving cars on the road is actually around legislation rather than technology. So I think following on from kind of ethics and all these ethical considerations, legislation's kind of the application of that, right?
Yeah, and I kind of only looked through the UK government because that's where we're living right now. Although kind of the most practical examples of where self-driving is used is actually been in America, California, Arizona,
and China, as we'll come on to.
Yeah, we'll come on to that. But yeah, the UK government report kind of they talk about a specific nuance that about self-driving is conceptually different to driving assistance, and that's kind of that difference between level 2 and 3, where level 2 have these kind of the car can control the vehicle, but they're still calling it assistance because you have to remain vigilant at all times. Level 3 is kind of where the law kind of steps in and protects you a bit. So To kind of summarize it, when a car is in self-driving state, you are no longer liable for the crashes. And as we mentioned earlier, level 3 vehicles do have times where they need human assistance, and they have this thing called a transition demand. And after transition demand, the human is back to being liable for the errors. So the big question is, how long do you take before? How long should the transition demand take? Is it 1 second? Is it 10?
Of course, because that's a sort of reaction time thing that it could have a detriment on the potential outcome, right?
Exactly.
If that transition period is longer.
Yeah. So I think that's still an open question, and
which again, I think some of the reason why these level 3 cars aren't kind of in full swing yet, even though we see these level 3 ready cars on the road, so the technology is there, it's just the kind of legislation hasn't caught up, partly because these ethical challenges that we just touched on haven't been solved yet.
And on top of this, when interviewing kind of perspectives on self-driving cars, people don't want this kind of limbo where they have to remain like semi-vigilant. But it's very comforting to have a self-driving car where that while it's driving, hopefully it's been tested, it's safe enough, and you're not going to be liable for if it hits a cone or I don't know something, or something worse happens.
Yeah, I was reading a report recently actually where someone was describing their experience with Tesla's what they call now full self-driving beta version, where they were actually saying that the car was fully driving itself, so that was level 2 in the context of those levels. But they actually said that in terms of their experience with it kind of felt like more effort to kind of babysit and watch over the decisions that the car was making rather than just doing it themselves. So it is a bit of an interesting one, this level 2, and I think companies and people are quite keen to get to the next level where there is a lot of confidence in letting the vehicle do it by itself. But when you kind of have to watch over it and babysit the car, it sounds like it's quite a lot of effort. But I suppose one really interesting country to now look at, just quickly finish on, is China, because they are very much at the cutting edge and forefront of innovation in the technology in self-driving vehicles, but also the legislation as well. So back in 2020, China's National Development and Reform Commission, as well as their Ministry of Industry and IT, and kind of all these different sectors of government, basically jointly issued this strategy to innovate the development of autonomous vehicles, which basically set a few goals to achieve by 2025. So, a 5-year plan that was very aggressive and so far seems to be relatively on track. So they basically wanted the large-scale production of level 3 vehicles. So those are the ones where, there is a transition period, but when the car's driving itself, you can just sit back and let it do its thing. And there was also the market launch of some level 4 vehicles. And another thing that they were really focusing on, which again has started to come to fruition, was the connectivity of these cars using like 5G internet networks. And this is another aspect where we can utilize technology in that, imagine if when you're driving your car, you know for a fact exactly what the next move of all the other cars around you is going to be. You can imagine that's just going to make everything so much safer and more predictable. So this was something that China was really focusing on, was changing the legislation to allow cars to communicate with each other. And also the standardization of autonomous driving across manufacturers. So these kind of standards, the capabilities, the technology used, and it seems to be coming into effect. So in 2022, Shenzhen permitted self-driving cars on the road, which is a very big milestone in China for autonomous driving. And then again, in the same year, and by the end of 2022, we basically started to see, because of these legislative changes, the mass production of level 3 vehicles in China. And as of July 2022, these level 3 ready vehicles started hitting the road. So they weren't quite allowed to use the level 3 technology yet. And as of November 2023, when we're recording this, they're still not permitted to use level 3 just yet. But what's super interesting is that over 42% of China's new passenger vehicles are already using level 2. So you can see that they're kind of, pardon the pun again, miles ahead of some of the other countries. A lot of this has been down to their quick changes to legislation. So yeah, I think in terms of big changes in the future and the cutting edge of self-driving cars, China's definitely leading the way, and their manufacturing is much further ahead than the likes of Tesla and other countries.
Wow, I mean, yeah, 42% is a huge proportion of cars being level 2, and certainly much more than what I see around in the UK. So
Yeah. So I think just kind of rounding things up and going back to what we spoke about. So obviously, it's no surprise that if this concept of computer vision and people started thinking about how to get computers to see started to emerge in the 50s, nearly 80 years on from that now, it's kind of no surprise that the technology is there, and we're kind of starting to understand how to navigate and interpret this world using AI. But it's now just the legislative and manufacturing side that is catching up.
wow. So how far away is it, Kieren?
Yeah, we did say we were going to make a little prediction, didn't we, from state of the art? So I don't know. You go first.
Oh, copping out. I think although the legislation is massively restricting, testing, and it's very expensive to try out these new technologies, I still think it's a long way away. I think at least 10 years.
And what's your reasoning for that?
I still think that, are we talking about level 5?
Yes.
So my reasoning for that is, for level 5, complete automation, I think that we still don't know how to kind of validate we still don't know how to validate the kind of risk and the likelihood of a crash or something like that. And I think we're going to be much stricter when choosing an AI to control car than humans. So even if there's evidence for them to be safer than humans, I still think it's going to be hard to push that from a legislation point of view.
Yeah, I do boringly agree that, my big drawback, I, again, would estimate that in terms of level 5, I think we're probably 30 years away into before we're seeing that in kind of most vehicles, and kind of people are just getting into cars and not even thinking about any part of getting to their destination. But I think my main reason for that is that the technology is quite close, and I think we will be able to predict and avoid crashes. I mean, you already start to see some of these videos where Teslas have kind of stopped the car. I saw a crazy video where this Tesla kind of was forecasting and predicting a crash before it even happened, and it already started braking, and then split second later, these two cars ahead of it crashed.
Wow.
So I think the technology is already very close. But yeah, I do think in terms of being able to quantify and decide on those ethical decisions, I don't think any manufacturer or human wants to kind of take the responsibility there and say, in X scenario or Y scenario, this is what is done. I suppose with Tesla's approach, where they're training their cars to just completely mimic humans, that could be one quicker route that, if we kind of say, oh, well, it's just kind of driving slightly better than your average human, that's kind of acceptable, which I suppose, even slightly above average, when you scale that to how many cars you have on the road, is still going to be a massive increase in safety. So yeah, who knows, but I do think it's quite a while off before we're in the likes of Will Smith just hopping into his Audi. That
you do like that reference, don't you?
Yeah, I love that film, man.
Well, yeah, hopefully that clears things up and you enjoyed the episode.
Nice. And I think now we've started to kind of mix these episodes up slightly. So obviously covering computer vision there. We've done language models. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we're going to look to cover deep fakes and the world of kind of generating images and videos, and a little bit on kind of what's been happening in Hollywood and the ethical considerations of that.
Thanks for listening.
And catch you next time.